Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game SO. Today I got a completely different video for you guys this Sunday evening because I brought myself into the office on the weekend because the news came out that unfortunately MARS FPGA is not happening, won't be a product anytime soon. And this is a subject I haven't talked about on the channel for over a year because there really hasn't been any news. I really don't do a lot of presumptions on the channel, so when there isn't any updated information, this usually isn't a topic I talk about. But obviously I think this was pretty much well known even if it hadn't been announced because a lot of the cores that were teased for MARS FPGA have come over to Mr. FPGA and Analogue Pocket at this point in time. Though lacking that announcement, the MARS FPGA wasn't actually happening. Of course there was that 1% chance that maybe there was something else going on behind the scenes that we just didn't know about. But as of about 24 hours ago, it was announced that MARS FPGA is not happening, so we'll get into the stated reasons, how far the project was along before it was cancelled, and kind of talk about FPGA gaming in general. Before we get too far involved though, do me a huge favor down below, hit like and subscribe and ring that notification bell, definitely helps us out. And if you feel so inclined and want to support the channel, we got a Patreon link down below as well. But obviously MARS FPGA got relatively far along the development process because we did see PCBs with silicon on them, and it was running one FPGA core at a gaming expo. This was not a paper design, it wasn't just a CGI rendered image, it did have actual engineering behind it. But somewhere along the line that basically became an issue. Maybe some of the work didn't get finished up. Again, it's one of those things, I can only talk about what's publicly stated here, even if I do have some information that people have told me that I cannot verify. It's one of those things I only like to talk about the information at hand, but it is easy to say the MARS FPGA was a tangible object that was in development. You could probably hold it, turn it around in your hand, even if I wasn't physically there. And before you think it, I do not relish in the fact that this project didn't work out. Trust me, I have shipped many consumer products in my previous employment, and there's definitely situations in which we got really far down the line, and for one reason or another, that project or hardware just could not come out. More often than not, it was basically just the technology couldn't be brought down to a price point that consumers would actually deal with, and you had to wait some years until the actual hardware would be at a proper price so you could actually get some sell-through. But as I have delivered multiple products to the consumer-facing market in snowboarding and technology, I do absolutely realize that a lot of work can go into projects that never actually sees the light of day. And the MARS FPGA team were definitely teasing a lot of cores, and for the most part, what they have shown on MARS FPGA and teased for releases for that hardware have come over to Mr. FPGA and Analogue Pocket. So that's why I say, even though MARS now has been stated to be cancelled, it was one of those things. There wasn't really anything to talk about because that was always the presumption for the longest time, that this project wasn't going forward. But honestly, that's just kind of how it goes sometimes, not just in FPGA gaming, but gaming in general, or even releases in general. Oftentimes, things just don't ever see the finish line for one reason or another. And it is one of those things I've always kind of been curious about, and I have talked about in previous videos, just how big of an ecosystem FPGA gaming can truly support. Because even though I make a lot of videos on Mr. FPGA, and I'll be doing the Analogue 3D review very shortly, it is one of those things, FPGA gaming is still an absolutely tiny niche as far as gaming in general is concerned, and even retro gaming. So I've always been on kind of the side of we can't have too many projects all at once because it will fracture the user base, and basically if you're trying to siphon off just a little bit of everyone, then no project is probably going to have enough people to actually make itself exist and be profitable. Now I could be wrong, maybe there is space for another competitor in the scene, whether it's MARS, obviously not, or anybody else, but it is kind of a question I've always had in the back of my head, just how many different platforms can we have for something as niche as FPGA gaming? But again, there was this PCB by the first engineer, and then it moved over to another engineer who apparently didn't finish the job. Again, this is all just kind of stated information, but I don't have any way to verify any of it. So I basically just tell you what has been said versus what I am saying. And it did have some interesting people behind it. It was obviously supposed to have a Sega Dreamcast core as well as a 3DO core, but we now know that 3DO is being worked on by SRG 320 on the Mr. FPGA side of things. So that is definitely something that is still going to be coming to FPGA gaming. And as far as Dreamcast and FPGA is concerned, don't worry, Alejandro and Super Sega have you covered. And honestly, I kind of missed that guy. He was absolutely shithouse rat crazy, but also entertaining at the same time. But to get to this stage where you actually have silicon populated on a PCB and you do have it running anything whatsoever is not a small feat. So again, it is one of those things, they definitely got relatively far down the road before they hit all these roadblocks. And people like Todd Gill were working on it, as well as Mike G, obviously from RetroTink fame. So it did have some good names behind it, but again, it just is a project that isn't going to be moving forward. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people are just going to be leaving the comments that that definitely isn't unexpected, and honestly, no, it is not expected. Even from the announcement day, there was definitely questions if this thing would be vaporware or not. And I really wouldn't say it is quote-unquote vaporware, because vaporware usually never actually exists as a physical object you can hold in your hand. This got beyond vaporware status, and I will give the MARS FPGA team credit for that, even if again it isn't actually going to ship and never did get finished. But a Dreamcast FPGA core definitely is something people want to see in the future, and it is something I think that somebody in certain amounts of time are going to be bringing to us. What platform that's going to be on, I just don't know yet, but there's definitely some candidates that are going to be coming down the pipe. And as far as the hardware on MARS, it was definitely outputting a signal. It was on PVMs, it did have controller inputs, and the entire idea was to have this thing reading original cartridges and being able to operate both in the HDMI space as well as the analog space. And they even had prototypes of arcade sticks here. The Titan obviously goes along with the MARS as far as the concept and naming convention is concerned. And this is something that did exist, but obviously, and I don't mean this in a negative way, designing and making an arcade stick work is a hell of a lot easier than designing and making an entire FPGA console work, because inside of this box, maybe if it even is over onto USB encoding, is something that any hobbyist with a soldering iron could basically make in like a day or two. That's not taking credit away from the fact that it worked, it's just saying that this is something that doesn't really require a lot of engineering out there. The parts do exist, and even if you wanted to spin up your own custom USB encoder board, again, if you can hold a soldering iron and download some files from GitHub, you definitely can make that work. And it would have been interesting to see this thing through to fruition, because I would have been curious to check it out. And I do understand that a couple of the members of the MARS team might not be my biggest fans, but the reality is that's totally fine. You don't all have to love me, I just talk about technology here and where it's going. So it's one of those things. Had MARS released and had it been good, I would have happily told you that it released and it was good, and run videos on it, because I care about you getting good hardware information, hearing what's new and exciting. That way you can make better informed decisions as far as what you're shopping for. And obviously Analogue 3D is out now. Mine basically is just about ready to be delivered, but it is one of those things that's not going to be an open FPGA console, so even if it is sitting on a 200,000 plus logic element FPGA chip, it isn't going to be anything that gets utilized. Now maybe on the ModRetro M64 side of things, with a bigger FPGA that has been stated to be open, something like Dreamcast could be possible in the future. Maybe something like the DE25 Nano that is now here, even if we don't know what it's going to be used for, if anything, maybe that could potentially do a Dreamcast core. My guess would be probably not, but you never know what creative engineers and coders out there are going to do. But it's one of those things. Dreamcast and Naomi era seem to be what would be coming next on the console side of things, because obviously we have Sega Saturn, PlayStation 1, and Nintendo 64, and I've always stated that stuff like GameCube, Xbox, and PlayStation 2 are too far beyond our current hardware, at least at a price that you would want to pay for, and honestly, no engineer or coder out there is probably going to have enough time to make it in their spare time. But something like a Dreamcast FPGA core that the MARS team said was going to be coming to their platform, that is definitely something I still want to see come to FPGA gaming in general, because it really does feel like the best console that could get an FPGA core. And their plan, again, at least stated in their press announcements, this is probably like 14 months old now or so, was that both Naomi as well as Dreamcast would be coming to MARS, and I think people were optimistic and hoping that, hey, maybe something like that really could happen, because if you know me and you know the channel, you know I love this hardware. And honestly, you have to give the MARS FPGA team, at least on the engineering side of things, a little bit of credit here, because they did get like 50% along the way. And I would say Todd Gill of Retro Frog, his case design was absolutely awesome, and it was something that I wanted to see exist as a physical object in front of me, because I really did like the case design. Kind of felt a little bit like Bizarro World Dreamcast. Maybe if something like the actual 3D Effects Dreamcast was made, not the Power VR one, maybe that's what the case would actually look like. But they had cores that were loading things up on the prototype, and that is no small feat. Like I said though, basically everything that the MARS team was working on is now available on Mr. FPGA and Analogue Pocket, so obviously as far as the games and the FPGA cores are concerned, nothing was really lost here in MARS FPGA not actually making it to market. And I'm sure the Coin-Op collection is still going to continue to make these things and release them for everyone. And even though I don't believe that a lot of the team actually are my biggest fans, that's totally fine. I'm not here to say haha or I'm glad it's cancelled. Honestly, it would have been fun to see something like this actually get finished, because I I love technology. I love hardware. I love tearing it down and talking about it on camera. So it is one of those things. I don't think it's going to be a surprise to many people. Obviously, MARS FPGA is not going to see a release. It has been canceled and won't be coming to market. But it's one of those things. I almost didn't make a video, but I thought to myself, well, I've talked about this so much, it would be strange to ignore the fact that it was finally announced that this thing actually isn't releasing. But that's just kind of the reality of those situations. MARS is not going here. It is not going anywhere. It has been canceled. We'll have to wait and see what the next project in FPGA gaming is going to be, because I'm curious about ModRetro M64 and that open FPGA chip. As far as actually being able to load up new cores, that'll definitely be something interesting to follow in the future. Leave me a comment down below. Tell me what you want the next thing in FPGA to be, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.